Folks, about a month after release, Mortal Kombat 1 just got its first big patch, and a lot of things changed. And while a lot of people are happy that some of the more overpowered characters like Cyrax Assist or maybe like Baraka got some nerfs, there's definitely a lot of discourse about whether this is too soon for a patch for a fighting game. This is a genre where metas can take a really long time to develop. So do we really want to be changing things around when we don't even know how powerful things truly are until players have had more time to put into the game? Meanwhile, over in Street Fighter land, we've been dealing with the same meta since the game's launch, and there is not planning to be a big sort of huge shake-up balance patch for the game for essentially a year after the game's release. Once we have like Capcom Pro Tour and stuff finished up, then they're finally going to do a major patch for the game and change a lot of stuff. So while I definitely respect the fact that this is giving players time to really solve the meta, this is giving time for things to develop before we make any hasty decisions, at the same time, I understand if players are getting a little bit frustrated still fighting against Luke and JP and Ken and all these characters that we've known have been top tier since basically like month one. We're still dealing with them and nothing is changing. So I find in general, fighting games are in a very tough position, right? Because they're torn between these two aspects. One being modern fighting games are very much trying to be live service games, meaning they're getting new DLC on like a monthly basis. They're having season passes for the players to level up so they keep coming back to the game. They're having events in the game like the Battle Hub tournaments and stuff for Street Fighter 6. So they really want these to be constant games that you're coming back to day in and day out. And, you know, they're going to be developing the game in real time as people play. But on the other end, we have the issue that, first of all, fighting games are very skill intensive and fighting games take a long time to learn even just one character. So it can be really frustrated when you put in hundreds of hours into mastering a character and then the character gets massively changed overnight and none of the stuff that you've been grinding out works anymore. So I definitely understand that source of frustration. Also, because fighting games are so complex and so difficult, sometimes we're wrong. You know, there have been situations like Sentinel in Marvel vs. Capcom 3. Everyone thought he was like the best character in the game. They nerfed him really badly, and then it turns out that he's actually a really bad character other than his assists. So stuff like that does happen in fighting games, so we definitely don't want to be too hasty with changing things around. But it's a really hard balance to strike, right? If we look at other genres, games like League of Legends or, you know, Teamfight Tactics or games like that, live service games, they're getting frequent updates, like every 2 weeks or something. They get balance changes that really shake things up because they know they want their players playing every single day. And they're worried that if the meta gets too stagnant, if the same strategies or characters are overpowered for months on end, players will get bored and go play something else. So I understand why a lot of games have this sort of revolving door. Whoever's on top gets nerfed, and then a new character becomes the problem and they have to get nerfed. But is that really something that we want for fighting games? Even if it keeps people coming back, even if it keeps the game always changing and interesting, does it create more problems because all of a sudden we're punishing players for putting too much time in? They have to relearn things all the time, and then we're creating these wacky metas where, like, who knows, Evo could happen and some character randomly ends up having some broken stuff that we didn't know about because they just got patched. So these issues definitely exist, and it definitely makes balancing and patching for fighting games really, really difficult. But I was curious what the people at home thought about this particular issue. And so I made a poll. Here on Twitter, I asked, how often do you think fighting games should be balance patched other than things like game-breaking bugs? And I was somewhat surprised. I wasn't really surprised that 2 to 3 times per year won. I think if you ask a lot of fighting game players, this is about the rate that most people expect, I feel. But what really surprised me was just how few people put frequently 1 time or more per month and how few people put 0 to 1 times per year. I kind of thought these opinions would be more well represented, but I wanted to go through and look at what some people are saying and discuss whether I agree or disagree with the reasoning. So Sajam was one of the supporters of the 2 to 3 times per year schedule. Big patch after the finals. and then a mid patch after Evo. And I don't think that this is exactly what's happening with Street Fighter 6. I think they're just planning on doing one big patch. I don't think we're gonna get a mid patch like midway through next year, but I'm not sure. So yeah, I kind of agree with this as well. I think having a second patch to look forward to can kind of dull some of the burn if your character got changes that you aren't happy with in the big patch, or if they're doing stuff like introducing new moves in the big patch, you know, that has more potential to create imbalances. The more you change things, the more potential there is for things to go wrong. So having a second mid patch to kind of touch up things, I think it makes a lot of sense. So I think a lot of people would probably agree with this. I can tolerate more frequent patching depending on the scope or game, but yeah, that schedule seems solid as a baseline. You know, I think I can tolerate more frequent patching too. I gotta say, you guys know I played in a Teamfight Tactics tournament this year, and that really opened my eyes to just how frequent some games are patching, and how even though you are sometimes frustrated with a certain patch, you're like, oh, this patch sucks. There's like one or two strategies that are just so overpowered, but then 2 weeks later it's gone and you have something else to focus on. So, you know, I don't think it would be great if every fighting game was like this, if every single fighting game was just getting patched all the time. But I think if some games try it out, you know, maybe with Project L coming out, maybe they'll try out a more frequent schedule. I would be curious how it would go and whether we would all get tired of the constant changes. Here was one from Infilament the Legend. Any more than once every 6 months and players will stop looking for in-game solutions and just complain or wait for characters to be buffed or nerfed. I mean, to be honest, people already do this, right? Already the vast majority of players don't look for in-game solutions. They just wait for their favorite player or influencer to tell them what to do and what to think, and they just complain on Twitter in the meantime. So I think people already do this. And people already just complain and ask for buffs and nerfs. Like, of course, everyone's doing this already. But so I think that the community could tolerate more frequent patching. I think we're already well in the midst of this, regardless of whether we actually get more frequent patches or not. Yeah, Tempest NYC as well, 2 to 3 times a year or less is best. But I thought this was an interesting point. I think a lot of patches can be annoying for fighting games, but some versions need them a lot, which I think is super true. Like, no offense to Mortal Kombat 1, I think it's a very fun game, but I think most people would agree that Mortal Kombat 1 did need patches at launch more than, for example, Street Fighter 6, which I think Street Fighter 6, despite some of its balance issues, is a very stable game for the most part, whereas Mortal Kombat 1 shipped with some kind of glaring issues that had to be fixed. So I do agree that some versions definitely need patches a lot. So I think that we could push it a little more potentially than just 2 to 3 times a year for every single game. All right, here's one from Bamani AK. Having a specific time frame is the wrong way to go. Bad patches need to be addressed sooner. Good patches need to be left alone for longer and messed with less. See, this is an interesting idea because, you know, some games, like, I know I've talked about TFT a lot, but that's one of the few sort of live service esports games that I play regularly. And that game has a patch schedule that they're gonna meet the schedule no matter what. They will be releasing patches on pre-planned dates no matter what, and then they just determine what has to be in the patch as they go. Whereas, you know, if a game is in a really good spot, maybe we just don't need to patch it. So games that are maybe a little more experimental, a little bit crazy, they can release fewer patches, release more patches, that is, whereas games that are a little more stable, they can release fewer patches. I mean, an example that comes to mind for me is like DNF Duel. I feel like DNF Duel was kind of hurt by its patch schedule, right? DNF Duel didn't get its first balance patch for a really long time, and people got really tired of the meta and of Swiftmaster and of certain characters being really unviable. So maybe that was a game that was more in need of more frequent patching, since it was definitely an experimental game. It was kind of a new type of game we hadn't really seen before, with one button everything, with a lot of influence from Marvel 3, but with more Street Fighter style pacing and movement. So it was more of an experimental game. It was less solid on release, so maybe it could have used more patches. I think we've definitely talked about examples where too frequent patching was a mistake, you know, like Marvel vs. Capcom 3 nerfing Sentinel. But I think there are also examples where not enough patches have hurt a game as well, and I think DNF Duel is a big example of that. Sammy096 says, I think nowadays fighting games get solved really fast due to how good players have gotten and how fast information spreads around. Because of that, metas can feel stale as they feel figured out. Yeah, so I agree with this as well. I think if we look back at older games, we would be wrong about the metas for like a really long time. I mean, like vanilla Street Fighter 4, for like 10 months or whatever that we played vanilla Street Fighter 4, we all thought that old Sagat was the best character in the game. Oh, old Sagat. I mean, vanilla Sagat. We thought that regular Sagat was the best character in Street Fighter 4, but I think with the aid of hindsight, we would probably agree that maybe he's only like the third best, and actually Seth was a major problem that we just didn't know at the time until people got to put more time into the game. So yeah, back then, I think when, you know, YouTube was still young, the level of content wasn't there, people weren't using Twitter and stuff like that to share tech, and Discord to share tech to the degree they are now. And also with online, people can just grind out way more games than they did back in the day. It used to be, you know, people played with the delay-based online, but in general, it was like the weeklies and the tournaments and stuff. That was where the real tech was shown. But now people are just finding tech, testing it out online, thousands of matches per week or whatever, and really downloading the characters faster than where they were before. So I agree that if we think about what things were like back in the day, and we kind of use that for a guide of like how quickly can we figure out a game's meta, I don't really think that holds true anymore. I think in modern times, metas are figured out a lot quicker. That's not to say that we're never wrong. Obviously, we're wrong, you know, still a decent amount, but I think for the most part, we have a much better idea now about balance once a game has been out for a little while than we used to, for sure. All right, of course, this is the most true opinion of all. Never if my character is top tier. If my character is not top tier, then frequently. The further down my main is, patch it more frequently until they're top tier. Yeah, definitely 100%. I think we can all agree with this one. But you know what? So like I said, I was surprised that the two kind of outlier options here of 0 to 1 time a year and 1+ time per month, I'm surprised that so few people agreed with these. Personally, I think that in general, I think I agree with most people that 2 to 3 times a year is probably best. You know, maybe one big patch per year, and then one kind of B patch later in the year. Like a lot of people said, that might be the best general case for games. So I would like to see a game try this. I would really like to see a fighting game that takes more of a league type model, especially since, you know, a lot of games are trying to add characters really frequently the same way that League does. If we're going to be adding characters frequently, why can't we add patches or balance changes frequently as well? You know, we're going to be shaking up the meta. So I would like to see it at least once. I'm not saying every game should do it. Definitely some games shouldn't. I think Street Fighter 6 maybe would be better served by a 2 times a year schedule. But I would like to see a game try frequent patches just to keep things interesting and see what happens. See if the players do get tired of it. And again, maybe it can be like when the game first comes out, we patch it once a month for 6 months or whatever. And then we go, okay, that's it for season 1. And then next year, you know, we'll maybe think about changing it again, but we can take some time off to let the meta develop. I don't know. In general, I think I would just like to see fighting games shake it up a little bit, because I think we're getting too used to the current sort of system that we have of balance changes, right? You know, back in the day, we would get Street Fighter 3, and then we would get Street Fighter 3 Second Impact, and then we would get Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, you know, 1 year after another, Street Fighter 4, Super Street Fighter 4, Arcade Edition, whatever. You know, I think that we got used to that, and then the patch era has kind of changed things to another degree, where now it's like, okay, now we release the game, and then maybe a few months later we release the balance patch, and then maybe a few months after that we release another balance patch. You know, we're just used to it, whereas maybe we would be better served by going outside of the box and trying something that hasn't been tried before. I don't know. It's just a thought. So yeah, maybe everyone would hate a game with frequent patching, but I would like to see it tried once. But yeah, again, definitely, I think I agree with the people who are saying 2 times a year seems like a good rate. But what do you guys think down in the comments? I would love to hear your opinions. What do you think about the patching issue? Do you even think it is an issue? Let me know what you think. And with that, we're going to end the video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, everybody.